Hi everyone, this is Phil Travis, and this week's presentation is on the inhabitants of ancient America, pre-Columbian America, if you will. Um, Columbian America refers to the period after the arrival of the Spanish and European colonizers into the 1400s and the 1500s particularly. So we're going to look a little bit about the inhabitants of particularly Central America during the period of the pre-Columbian period. This map depicts for you what is believed to be the method or the manner in which the Americas were populated with people. So scientists, archaeologists, historians, and so forth believe that, of course, we know human ancestors originated in Africa, and we believe from there over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, people migrated throughout the world. They migrated to Europe, they migrated to Asia, and so forth. We believe that North and South America were the last places that that people migrated to. And we believe that this migration, and there's some debate over this, but we generally accept that this migration of peoples to the Americas occurred during the period of the last great ice age, which was around about 15,000 BCE. The last great ice age caused for lowering of sea levels, and you can tell by the shaded areas here how different the coastline would have been, and you can also get a feel for the expanse of glacial movement during the last ice age. The last ice age created a land bridge, an area that was low-lying between Asia and North America, between Alaska and Siberia. And we believe it's through this area that archaic Americans would have migrated over more than 1,000 years, migrated across as they hunted and moved with their game. Game which we believe by and large were large mammoths. The evidence that early Americans were hunting large mammoths comes from the discovery of Clovis points across the Americas. These Clovis points are spear points, and they're evidence of the fact that native people during the Archaic period would have foraged on large mammoths, large animals that would have roamed the land at this time, now extinct, of course. This discovery of what are called Folsom points, discovered by George McJunkin in 1927, depicts the movement of people from the hunting of large game like mammoths to the hunting of smaller animals. These are arrow points. They're much smaller, and they depict a movement away from the large kind of spear hunting. The discovery of Folsom points was a very significant discovery. It is in New Mexico in 1927, and it lends credence to the idea that that Americans that the Americas were the last major place populated by humans, and it also is evidence of a transition in their way of life from hunting of mammoths and large game with large spears to the hunting of smaller game with points such as these. So I want to look a little bit about the people of Central America. The original ancestors of groups like the Maya, of the Aztecs, which you probably have heard of some of these groups, their ancestors were a group known as the Olmecs. And the Olmecs are sometimes referred to as the rubber people. And this is because of the location of rubber trees in the area. They would have established agricultural villages about 2000 BCE. Their villages would have been centered on growing crops like tomatoes, avocados, peppers, maize or corn, and of course also the usage of turkeys. And there was also the presence of barkless dogs. There are no major beasts of burden in the Americas at this time, so you don't have horses in the Americas at this time. And in this area of Central America, you know, certainly in North America, you would have had bison and so forth. But in this area of Central America, we would not see any large-scale domesticated animals outside of, you know, the usage of turkeys and dogs and these types of things. This is another look at the locations of Olmec civilizations. Major civilizations are places like Tres Zapotes and La Venta. This map depicts for you, to give you a perspective on the region we're talking about. The Olmec heartland is in the orangish red. The Mayan civilization, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, is in green. And the Aztec Empire is in yellow. And, of course, the brown depicts for you the full expanse of Mesoamerican influence of these cultures. The Aztec, Olmec, and Maya, as you probably are not surprised by looking at this map, all share certain basic cultural similarities. And much of these practices really began first with the Olmec. Olmec cities are not major dwelling areas. They are ceremonial centers. They're cities of strength like La Venta, which would have been the primary city from about 800 to 400 BCE, to give you some idea in respect to what we've been talking about in this class already. The Persian Wars with Greece were fought in and around 490 BCE. So that gives you kind of a feel for what types of things are happening in other parts of the world. The agriculture in Olmec cities, maize, squash, tomatoes, peppers, and so forth. The cities were ceremonial centers, and the leadership was largely kings and the high priesthood. Within palace and temple complexes, you also oftentimes found the presence of something called the Mayan ball game, though the ball game is really, it begins with the Olmecs, though it becomes associated with the Mayan. The ball game is in one respect an example of the earliest known spectator sport, or at least one of them. In the ball game, the players would have, it's a hard rubber ball, very hard, that the players had to knock through a circular ring, a goal, if you will, using any part of their body except their hands. And it was a hard game, and people, the ball was heavy, and you could actually hurt yourself hitting the ball incorrectly. There were professional players, but there were also many players who were forced to play because they were compelled to play. They maybe were captives in war, or maybe they were tribute from a neighboring tribe that was demanded to provide tribute to the Olmec cities and the Olmec, kings and priests. And in this respect, the ball games were at times games that were played to the death, meaning that the losers were offered as human sacrifice to the gods. I'll show you some ball courts momentarily. The Olmec people are also associated with these large stone heads. This is a indicative artifact of Olmec sculpture. These large heads, which can be pretty substantial in size. Obsidian was used as a primary purpose of tool and weapons. Obsidian is a volcanic stone. It's black. It's almost glassy-like. It's very, very sharp. And obsidian will be used, as are the ball game and other aspects of religious practice, are used by Mesoamerican peoples for multiple thousand years, all the way up through the Aztecs, which of course are conquered by the conquistadors in 1521. The Olmecs did have a rudimentary form of written language, a pictorial language, sort of like a hieroglyph, but we have yet to decipher it. We've not recovered enough of the written script of the Olmecs to understand the written language, and we're also not entirely certain of the nature of their decline. Some have suggested environmental issues and these types of things. We're not positive why the Olmec civilization declined exactly. The Olmecs are extremely influential on other peoples in the Americas, particularly the Maya, the people of Teotihuacan, and the Aztecs, which we will now speak about. So here we see a look at an early Olmec pyramid. The Mesoamerican people, as well as the people of the Andes Mountains in South America, the ancestors of the Inca, which I'll talk about in a moment, built pyramids. Their pyramids were usually temple structures, but they built pyramids, and in that respect, they were contemporaries of pyramid builders in other parts of the ancient world. Here we see the Olmec pyramid of La Venta. Here you also see an example of Olmec writing. We've never been able to decipher Olmec writing. We just don't have enough of it we haven't found a sort of Rosetta Stone-like clue to sort of unearth these writings. These are early pictorial hieroglyphs, but we've been yet to decipher it, but we do know they had a written language, and certainly the Mayan language, the Mayan hieroglyphs, which was much more elaborate and incredible, would have been building upon this. Here is an example of an artifact from Olmec culture. This is believed to be an artifact that depicts the spiritual offering of a young child to human sacrifice, which was fundamental part of religious practice for people throughout Mesoamerica. The heirs of the Maya are the Olmecs, and even though you will find people referred to as the Maya in modern Yucatan in Central America, the period of the Mayan height of power is from 300 CE to about 900 CE. The Maya were located in Central America, particularly the Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, Honduras, and Belize. They built over 80 large ceremonial centers in an area of the lowlands, jungled lowlands. They were masters of agriculture, of math, astronomy, and of writing. They have the most elaborate American writing system, and it's the only writing system in the Americas that we've been able to decipher effectively. It is one of the great languages of the ancient world, and we've learned much about Mayan culture from this, as I will talk about momentarily. So here you see a map depicting the extent of the Mayan Empire. You can see the various city centers. Many of these areas would have warred with one another, of course, so it is in a way inappropriate to think of it as a central and singular empire, because these various city-states would have very much warred with each other and vied for influence in an area. The most significant of these centers are places like Tikal in modern-day Guatemala, in Chichen Itza in the northern Yucatan Peninsula, and Palenque. The Mayan people live in the lowlands, so they live in heavily jungled areas, areas of the Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, Honduras, Belize. These areas have a lot of rain, and it washes the good soil away. So how you solve that is with some really innovative farming techniques. They would dredge the silt from the riverbeds, and they would use this to grow terraced growing beds that would be fertilized by the river silt. It's actually a very innovative and impressive agricultural technique that the Mayan employ. They grew maize, they grew cotton, they harvested cacao. Cacao was or cocoa, if you will, is an absolutely vital commodity for these people. It was a form, it created a stimulant drink that was very popular. It was also in some cases a form of currency. And here in this image you see depicted an Aztec. Now the Aztec Empire, which is located in the highlands of Mexico, and the Aztec Empire doesn't come around until really the 1300s, Common Era. It is the Aztecs that are conquered most significantly in Mexico by the conquistadors of Hernan Cortes in 1521. But the Aztecs shared many of these same types of practices. And so here you see an Aztec with a cacao pod. And again, significance to the sharing of areas or elements of culture from the Olmec to the Maya to the Aztecs and also to the people of Teotihuacan, which we'll talk about in a moment. Mayan City Kingdoms are like the Olmecs, centered around ceremonial centers. They're, as I mentioned earlier, they're not really a singular empire. The various city-states and kingdoms, if you will, war with each other constantly. And on the battlefield, their goal in Mayan warfare is not to, kill on the battlefield per se. Of course, that happened. But the real signature of a Mayan warrior's prowess was his ability to take prisoners, and particularly high-profile prisoners, that would then be presented to the king as an offering and a demonstration of the warrior's prowess on the battlefield. It was through taking high-profile captives that an individual could advance in the ranks of the Mayan military. And the captives would be generally used in some form of of ritual, whether or not it was performing in the ball game, which could result in death at the end, or a form of ritual sacrifice or bleeding. They would almost certainly be subjected to sacrifice before the gods. The hierarchy in Mayan cities are based on a hereditary kingship associated with a priesthood, and a nobility. Though, of course, the lower classes that populated the hinterlands around these centers would have been most responsible for the farming and the building projects that built the Great Pyramids of these peoples. The Great Pyramids that we're going to look at are sites like Tikal, Chichen Itza, and also sites like Palenque. This is an etching of a Mayan captive being presented to a king. Again, you can see the individual is bound and unquestionably will be presented for sacrifice ultimately. They also might compete in a Mayan ball game, which could be a competition to the death. Sadly, many of the etchings and writings of the Mayans have been lost. The Mayans had an elaborate written language, incredible culture, but when they were conquered by the Spanish in the 1500s, many of the Spanish Catholic priests and conquistadors who came saw their language and their practices as devil worship, and they justified destroying them. And so, to a large degree, a great amount of the artifacts of Mayan culture were destroyed at the hands of the conquistadors. Of the many books that were written by the Mayans, only 4 survived partially. Here is an example of the Temple of the Giant Jaguar in Tikal, which is in the jungles of Guatemala. This temple stands 154 feet high. And of course, it was a religious center, so various religious rituals and practices would have taken place at the top of this tremendous pyramid. Here you see again this map of the locations of major Mayan temple complexes and city sites. Here's another view from Tikal. You can see the scope of this ancient site of civilization. This site, of course, would have been swallowed by the jungle at one time, and only discovered in the last century, as it had to be unearthed from the jungle. Interestingly, we still are discovering new areas in Mesoamerica. Only in 2015, they discovered a whole brand new city site in Honduras that's believed to be peoples unassociated with the Mayan, or not Mayan, shall we say. So the jungle has really seized a tremendous amount of archaeological artifacts, and in a way it's exciting with the new things we discover, in another way it's sad with the many things we've lost. So you see Chichen Itza, located towards the north of the Yucatan Peninsula. If any of you ever go on holiday to the Yucatan, which is very popular for many Americans, it's very feasible to take a trip to Chichen Itza, albeit, some will tell you that, go to one of the other sites because Chichen Itza is the most touristy, the most popular place to go. And it's Chichen Itza that is associated with this, perhaps the most iconic of all American pyramids. It's a Mayan pyramid, one of the greatest temple sites of the Maya. Here's a look at the pyramid after, when it was discovered in the 20th century. The pyramid had effectively been claimed by the land, if you will. It was being enveloped by the plants around it. The Mayans were an incredibly advanced people. They completely separate from Asia, Europe, Africa, and so forth. The Mayans invented the mathematical concept 0. They had a highly advanced writing system, and the image you see down here at the bottom corner of your screen is an image from the Dresden Codex, which is the name of a book that one of the Mayan books that survives, and it depicts the Mayan hieroglyphs. The Mayans had a highly advanced writing system, and we did decipher it. It took a genius, but we did decipher it in the late 20th century. The Mayans had incredible epic stories like the myth of Papuval. We have with the Mayans incredible and amazing understandings of astronomy and of mathematics. So tremendous written language you find here. And the sad thing about this is upon the conquest of the Spanish conquistadors, the vast majority of this was intentionally destroyed in book burnings. These pages are made on a form of bark. It's not paper in the traditional sense that you think about it, but instead these are pages that are made from tree bark. And they had thousands of books, and we'll never know many elements of their culture because when the conquistadors, the Spanish came, they viewed the written language and the hieroglyphs as like devil worship, and so they conducted organized book burnings that destroyed all of the books except for, perhaps by chance and luck, 4 partial books has survived. Thankfully, these 4 partial books were enough to allow us to decipher these incredible hieroglyphs, but it's very sad when you think about what has been lost. The Mayan calendar was one of the great discoveries we've come to understand from these hieroglyphs. Mayan astronomy was highly advanced. The priests calculated a solar year within 17 seconds of the modern measurement, which is incredible. With all modern scientific techniques, they were able to, without any of that, they were able to estimate the time of the year, the Earth's passage around the sun, to within 17 seconds, which is incredible. The Mayan had 2 calendars. They had a solar calendar, which is the 365-day-a-year calendar, and then they had a ritual calendar, which was 260 days. Like most societies today, of course, we have 2 calendars too. We have the 365-day-a-year calendar, and we have a fiscal calendar, right? The Mayan had this as well. The calendar for the Mayan was used to try to predict the future. So each particular day associated with understandings of astronomy and so forth was considered to be associated with certain characteristics. And so each particular day had a unique characteristic to it. The priests would take the day from the 260-day calendar and the solar calendar, and they would basically combine them, and through this combination they would seek to predict the events for the coming day. There were an amount of unique combinations that made 52-year cycles where you would go through every combination of the calendar, and the priests used this to try to predict future events. At the end of each cycle, you would have, theoretically you would have some kind of tumultuous event, and the cycle would begin again. And of course, recently with the many people theorized that because we were running out of 52-year cycles in the Mayan calendar that somehow the world was going to come to an end. I don't think very many scientists or historians believed that. But the 52-year cycle was very important for the priesthood when it came to predicting the benefits or ills of a particular day. A good day to plant, a good day to make war, a good day to stay home, a good day to travel, these types of things. Mayan religion believed that humans were a product of maize and blood. They believed that in order for the maize to grow, in order for the land to be fertile effectively, that they had to provide for the gods human blood. And this meant that because the gods can either bring destruction or fertility, you have to please them, and you please the gods by providing them with human blood. The practice of bloodletting was a very common practice in Mayan culture. People would be bled, people would be sacrificed. This was a necessary component of Mayan religion. Often those sacrificed were victims that were given to the kingdom for tribute, like taxation. Others were captives from war. In some cases, even priests themselves bled themselves, effectively cutting their fingertips off and allowing their blood to bleed for the gods. So we see this as not simply barbarism. This is not barbarism. This is a religious practice. It's difficult for us to understand this because we don't practice human sacrifice. But this was not, it was incorrect for someone to see this as a case of savagery or barbarism. Rather, these were highly developed civilizations with highly advanced religions and highly advanced written languages. And for their religion, they required human sacrifice. It was necessary for the functioning of their society from their viewpoint. And so we see this as not barbarism, but rather as a unique variation of an ancient religious practice. Here you see the great ball court at Chichen Itza. This is the most impressive, perhaps, of all of the ball courts. It was an early spectator sport, and there were amateurs who played for fun. There were professionals who played, if you will, for a career, if you will, and they were also used for rituals. Many of the competitors in the ball game would have faced death upon their loss. And so, if you were a captive warrior, you very well might be made to play in this sporting event, and you very well might find the sides and sidelines of the field lined with human skulls, which would signify what happened if you lost. Another look at the great ball court. Another smaller ball court. I now want to take a look at Teotihuacan. If you look at this map depicts for you the major civilizations of Mesoamerica. You have, of course, the Olmec civilization, which is not represented down here, but would have been between the light green, the dark green, and the purple down there on the Gulf of Mexico. You have the Mayan civilization in the dark green. You have the Aztec civilization in the purple. And then we have the civilization of Teotihuacan, and then after it, the Toltecs, which were in the kind of lighter yellow. The civilization of Teotihuacan was very unique. The city site of Teotihuacan is located northeast of Mexico City, and it's probably the most impressive of all of the ancient pyramid sites in the Americas. It was a city of one time at 200,000 people, and it is one of the sites to go see some of the most impressive pyramids, not only in the Americas, but in the world. The city of Teotihuacan, the people of Teotihuacan, which are mysterious, we don't know a lot about the actual people of Teotihuacan. And this is because of a lack of written sources from this place. It's located in the highlands of central Mexico. It's very high. It's located on a site that used to be the center of several large interconnected lakes, like Lake Texcoco. Now, sadly, most of these lakes in the central areas of the highlands are now gone because humans have built cities and drained the lakes, tragically. The largest city of Mesoamerica was Teotihuacan. At its height, a city of 200,000 people with bustling markets, apartment complexes, temple complexes, and palaces. They were influenced by the Olmecs and the Maya. They practiced the Mayan calendar. They played the ball game. They would have undoubtedly participated in a similar written language as well. Though we have limited archaeological sources from this site. It wasn't a militaristic site, famous instead for its entrepreneurism. Orange pottery and obsidian works made in this site were distributed throughout the ancient world in Mesoamerica. The city collapsed sometime in 800 CE, and we're not exactly positive why, but it resulted in a mass destruction of books and the defacing of monument inscriptions. And some have believed that it wasn't a conquest, but rather some kind of internal rebellion, but we're not certain exactly why. Here is the most impressive pyramid, arguably in the Americas, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan is known for the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, which together represent perhaps the two most impressive pyramid structures located in Mesoamerica, and indeed vying for most impressive globally. Here's a view from the Pyramid of the Sun. On your left is the Pyramid of the Moon. Another look at the Pyramid of the Sun. These were temples. These were religious centers. The Pyramid of the Sun is highly impressive. It is not as tall as the Great Pyramid of Giza, but the footprint of this pyramid is almost as large as the Great Pyramid of Giza. So in many respects, this pyramid is just as impressive as the Great Pyramid of the Giza Plateau. I also want to talk about ancient Andean society briefly. So I'll go ahead and put this up here for you. Um, the Andes Mountains in South America was home to another prosperous and long existing civilization, the Andean people's civilization, of which there were a number of different groups. I am certain that every single one of you has probably heard of the Inca. Of course, the Inca were actually the offspring of a long history of Andean people. The Inca Empire itself only existed really from about 1300 till its conquest in 1532 BCE. The Inca Empire, as well as Machu Picchu, are comparatively, when compared with the long history of Andean civilization in the Americas, quite recent. Um, though it should be noted that the Inca shared many of the same practices that their ancestors had for many years high in the mountains of the Andes in South America, modern countries of Peru and Bolivia particularly. The Inca also, if I may make one more comment about this more recent people, a contemporary of the late Middle Ages in Europe, the Inca actually had an empire that was larger in terms of territory than the Roman Empire at its height. And they built impressive road systems, even through some of the most rugged mountain area that one could imagine. So highly impressive people here. The Andes Mountain offered much in the way of gold and silver, which would have been mined by the American people. They dealt with oftentimes an arid environment, and as a result of this, they developed a number of innovative farming techniques themselves. They relied largely on root plants like the potato, which, when the Columbian exchange occurs, that will revolutionize the diet of Europeans in the more modern area. They farmed cotton, and they also fermented a maize beer, an alcoholic beverage that would have been consumed by the people in the Andes. And they have found artifacts that depict nothing less than an Inca man drunk with two women helping him to keep from falling down. They did not have a written language. Written language has never been discovered in the Andean cultures. They did have methods of administration, something called the quipo, which I'll show you an image of in just a moment. But we're pretty positive, at least we've never discovered any evidence of a formal written language. But nonetheless, this did not prevent them from forming an incredibly elaborate empire with incredible building structures. On this map, you see depicted two of the ancient Andean civilizations. In the blue, you have Tiwanaku, which is located on the Great Lake of Tiwanaku, high up in the mountains of Bolivia and Peru. And in the sort of pinkish violet, you had the Wari culture. And these are some of the earliest Andean civilizations. Interestingly, the earliest known Andean civilization would be the Caral culture, which dominated a small area in Peru from about 2600 BCE to 2000 BCE. Now, this is where things get interesting. One, Caral culture built pyramids, and the ancestors of the Inca, like the Inca too, actually mummified people. And there's evidence of people being mummified in Andean culture as far back as 6,000 years ago. And some have suggested that the practice of mummification may have begun before it began in Egypt, though it's very, very, very difficult to verify that. You're looking here at a ruin site of a Andean American pyramid. This is a pyramid site, signifier of Caral culture, and of course items like the quipo, which you see there, it's an administrative tool, a replacement for language, as it would have been used in these ancient societies for many thousands of years before, hundreds of years before the Inca would have used them. Here as well, you see another image of two of the Caral pyramids in modern-day Peru. Highly degraded, but nonetheless very significant pyramid structures. These pyramids were built as contemporaries to the Great Pyramids of Giza. So this is as the Egyptian people are building pyramids, so too on the other side of the Atlantic, seemingly free of any influence. The people of the Andes are doing similar things, and they're building pyramids in Central America as well. Here you see an example of the people of Tiwanaku and their building style. This is a gate at Tiwanaku, and is an example of the precision and highly skilled engineering of these people. And another thing that's important to note here is, as you can see by looking around you, this is very, very high. The elevation here is upwards of 12,000 feet. It might actually be more than that. I can't cite it off the top of my head, but it is very high, and it's above the tree line. And so that's another thing that's very impressive about it, is they would have had to drag these stones. After floating them across Lake Titicaca, they would have to drag these stones into place, and probably would have had to do so without, trees to roll them on, or to assist in any other fashion, unless, of course, they had moved trees from lower lands. But this is up above the tree line. Anyway, guys, I hope this is helpful. I hope it gives us a feel and a look at just how impressive the civilizations of the Americas were. We oftentimes get focused on Asia and Europe and Africa, and we fail to realize that the Americas at this time, there was a whole nother civilization of people that developed profound and amazing religions and cities, completely separate from the rest of the world. And unfortunately, much has been lost since the conquest, which occurred at the hands of particularly the Spanish conquistadors in the early 1500s. But thankfully, enough has survived to provide us with at least a fair degree of insight into these tremendous and profound civilizations.